Hey everybody, it's Kathy. Welcome to episode 24 of Mondays on the Mat. I'm coming to you live from my office/yoga room. And I was just about to tell you that my co-host is hanging out on my mat today and that you'd probably get to see her. And then she got up and went over into her bed. So I don't know if we'll get to see her or not today. But I'm so excited. Today's question comes from Jessica, and she wants to know if there is a correct or a proper way to do Apanasana, which is when you're lying on your back and hug your knees into your chest. And this is so interesting to me. So it's August, today's August 7th, and I consider August to be my official yoga birthday month because I started teaching in the month of August. So I'm now officially 11 years old as a yoga teacher and 21 years old as a yoga student. And so I've studied with and practiced with dozens and dozens of teachers. I've taken thousands of classes. I have in my teacher training repertoire close to 600 hours of official yoga teacher training experience and learning. And in all of those years and all of that time, and in over a dozen books on yoga poses on my bookshelf there, I have exactly one encounter with one instructor who has broken down Apanasana a little bit more meaningfully than just saying hug your knees into your chest and giving some further detail on the pose. So I was kind of fascinated by that, and I even pulled out my books and I was like, maybe it's just not sticking in my head, and I just overlooked it or something. And I looked for Apanasana in all of these books, and none of them have it as its own pose. A lot of yoga books, they have like, here is downward facing dog and an explanation of how to do it. Not a single one of these books has that. In one book, I did find that the purpose of Apanasana is to relieve or relax the back towards the end of a yoga sequence. Fascinating. So I am going to get into some variations of the pose, and that one specific one that I learned, the instructor's name is Jasmine Lieb, and she teaches from this really cool awareness of the skeletal structure and doing things in a way that's very therapeutic and healing to the physical body. So we'll definitely look at her way of teaching it. And give you a chance to taste that. I'm going to get down on the floor in just a second, but before I do, I just wanted to explain what the word Apanasana means, because it does not translate into knees to chest pose, even though that's the direction we give to get you into the posture. So Apana is the downward moving life force energy. So we've got different ways that life force moves in our body, and it travels on the vehicle of the breath or the wind. And so Apana is related to things like elimination and childbirth and menstruation and things like that, all of the ways that our life force moves down and out of our body, and is associated with wind. So the technical translation of the pose would be downward moving life force pose. Kind of not very descriptive. You'll also hear it described as wind relieving or gas relieving pose, because if you do squeeze and hug your knees into your chest, it can provide some massaging to the lower intestinal organs and help provide relief if you're having some issues with that. I know firsthand from my own experience, it definitely, if you've got a big old gas bubble stuck in there, it can definitely help to relieve that and get things moving, although it doesn't mean it happens every single time you do the pose. But just so you know, that's what it means. It does not necessarily translate right into knees to chest pose. So I'm going to get down on the floor. We're going to talk about some different variations of Apanasana, keeping in mind that the purpose of the pose is to relieve the back towards the end of a sequence. And if you're someplace where you can get down on the floor and do this with me, do it with me, because I'm going to give you an opportunity to feel inside your body before I give you my opinion, because we all have different bodies that feel things differently. And keep in mind that yoga is experiential. So that means that what matters most is your experience and what you're feeling inside your body, which is totally different from what I'm experiencing and feeling inside my body, and totally different from what I observe in other people's bodies when I'm instructing. So let's head down to the floor and taste Apanasana a couple of different ways and see if we can come to a conclusion at the end of today's video. Sorry, let me do it this way so I don't get a finger in front of the camera as we head down to the floor where my mat is waiting for me. Okay. Here we are. So, Apanasana, again, does not mean knees to chest in translation, but that's what we're going to do. Hug the knees to the chest. And when you do this pose, and what I'm doing right now is turning and looking at the camera, but when you're doing the pose, please keep your nose and your gaze towards the ceiling so that your neck is comfortable. I'm just doing this so that you can hear me and see me as I describe a couple of different things. So, what I see most often and what I do most often in this pose is to let the knees come apart and the feet be together, very much like child's pose, except that it's on the back. And I often describe this pose as upside down child's pose. So if the point is to relieve the back after doing a yoga sequence, if you were to grab your shins and squeeze and really pull your knees deeply in towards your chest, do that. Feel it. And think, is this relieving my back? What I'm feeling when I pull really firmly on my shins right now is that my spine, just above my low back, like right about in here, my spine is digging down into the mat. My hips are curling up. And if I were having a day where I was feeling really tight, I would probably feel a stretch through my low back and into my hips. The weather's warm right now. I don't feel super tight, but I could imagine on a day when I felt that way, that's what I'd be feeling. So to me, pulling in does not feel like relief to my back. If I just lightly hold my legs, so you can see the big difference there, how my sacrum released to the floor. If I lightly hold my legs, you do this. I'm not going to give the answer right away. I almost got tricked. Do that for a second. So pull in and then let go and relax. Does it feel like relief on the back? I mean, it kind of does. It definitely doesn't feel like I'm getting a huge stretch. And there's a little bit of the natural curvature of my low spine. I'm not totally flat. I'm also not naturally arched away from the floor. So yeah, I guess after I've been doing yoga for some time, that might feel like relief. Now, sometimes this pose is instructed with the knees together, and I know I'm sideways to the camera, but that would be knees apart. You can kind of see my back knee there. Knees together, and then wrapping and again squeezing the knees deeply into the chest. And sometimes teachers will even have you lift up and curl yourself in like a tight little ball. Do that for a second. Feel that. And does that feel like relief to your back? Especially if you had just done an hour or close to an hour and a half of yoga, would that feel like relief? To me, it feels like effort. First of all, lifting up to me definitely feels like effort. And there would be a relief in coming down in the upper back. My low back does not feel relieved, again, because if I'm pulling in really aggressively, you can see my hips start to lift and curl. And while that might be a stretch, it's not relief. So if I keep my knees together and do like I did in the first version and relax, same sort of situation. I'm not feeling a whole bunch of anything one way or the other. But again, if I've been doing yoga for an hour, it would probably feel a little bit more like relief than this really strong pulling in. So now we're going to look at a variation that really isn't taught very often. And like I said, I've only experienced this real specific instruction once in my years and years and thousands of yoga classes. And I occasionally do instruct this one. Let's taste it together and see if we can find out why. You're going to take your knees as wide apart as your frontal hip bones. So not wider than your chest like we did earlier, but right here at the front of the hip bone, knees straight in, and the feet as wide as the knees, so that you've got this nice parallel line from ankles to knees to hips. And then as you take a hold of your shins, pull in for a second. This is not the pose, just so you know. Pull in for a second, and again, feel your back. Like the first version, when I pull in, I feel above my sacrum, more to the mid part of my back, starting to dig into the floor. Now, holding onto your shins, push your shins away, keeping your knees and your feet parallel. And see if there comes a moment where that pressure or that stretch comes off, and feel your back. What I feel when I do this variation is the natural curvature of my entire spine. So just briefly, I'm going to turn my head away to explain that. Your neck should be lifted off of the floor. So chin's parallel to the floor here. You don't want your chin lifted way far back because that shortens the cervical curve. And if you tuck your chin in, it flattens it. But if you have your chin sort of parallel to the side wall, you're going to have the natural curvature of the cervical spine. Your thoracic spine is going to rest on the floor. So the part that's associated with your rib cage, that'll be touching the floor. And then as you move your shins away, you really can't quite see it here, but my low back, which naturally curves away from the floor, has lifted. And then the sacrum, the very bottom of my spine, is resting on the floor like the thoracic. So all of my natural curvatures are in alignment when I hold the shins, keeping the feet, knees, and hips parallel. And my back definitely feels a sense of relief. So it feels really good, this version. And I like it for that. But then we have to ask ourselves, is this Apanasana? Is this knees moving into the chest and creating that massaging action on the low belly, which can help relieve any gas that might be stuck in there? No. So it's interesting. I'm going to lift the camera back up and talk to you for just one more moment here about the pose. There we are. So what's interesting is there isn't a lot of written information on this posture. You can look online and you're going to probably find more the first two variations that I discussed, and even some that argue that it's about the stretch of the low back. I'm going to disagree with the stretch of the low back, although it can provide that. I think that really this pose is about relieving the back and is most appropriately found towards the end of a class. But yeah. Sorry, I got distracted. I think a cat wants in the room. We'll see if she cries again. Hang on. So if we're looking at it from that one book by Jessica Char, who is really an authority on yoga, and the pose is about relieving the back, then I'm going to say any version where you're not pulling in super aggressively, but you are more relaxed to relieve the back, not stretch it. And if you have any sort of back issues, that last version that I described is going to feel like heaven on your back. So I feel like it leaves things a little bit up in the air. Is there a correct way to do Apanasana? I'm going to say there's probably a couple of correct ways to do the pose. knees all the way together, knees apart, feet together, or with that lined up parallel moving away action. Any of those are going to be great for relieving your back. But pulling in and being super tight and super strong in the pose is more going to stretch your back, which is not the purpose of Apanasana. So there is definitely a cat wanting in. Hang on, let me grab her. Come on in. Can you see her? I don't think she came in front of the camera. This is Guildenstern. She is 17 years old, you guys. Say hi. Nope, she wants to go on her little window seat. So anyway, Jessica, I hope that helps bring a little bit more information and a little bit more awareness to the pose for you. I'm going to say anything that feels good, that creates release and relax in your back, not a big strong stretch, is the correct way to do Apanasana. If you have any more questions, or if you have a different question that you would like answered about yoga, please be sure to add them in the comments down here. Where am I? There, down there, or ask me live in class. Or shoot me a message over on Facebook or something like that, and I will definitely be sure to answer you on an upcoming episode of Mondays on the Mat. Hey, you guys, this week in class, we're working on a pose called Dragonfly, which is a really fun arm balance to kind of celebrate the fact that summer is still here and we're having fun and being really super playful. And the fact that there are so many dragonflies hanging around this year. Dragonflies are cool because they represent joy and adaptability and freedom and clarity and all of these cool qualities that summer and lightness and warmth brings to us. So please join me in class this week, Tuesdays 6:30 to 8, Wednesday 5:30 to 7, Friday 9:30 to 11, and Saturday 9 to 10:30 a.m. Also coming up in about a week, I have an opening for a regular ongoing private lesson. So if that interests you, please be sure to use the contact form over at kathyweissyoga.com, and we'll get you all set up for some private lessons. Thanks for tuning in, everybody, and I look forward to seeing you next week live on Mondays on the Mat. Namaste.